In the summer of 1990, the world watched as tanks rolled across a border in the Middle East, setting in motion a conflict that would redefine the post-Cold War order. What followed was not merely a war over territory, but a pivotal moment when nations united against aggression. Modern warfare transformed before our eyes, and the seeds of decades of future conflict were sown. This is the story of the Gulf War. To understand the Gulf War, we must first understand the man who ignited it. By 1979, Saddam Hussein had consolidated his grip on Iraq through a brutal purge of political rivals. With absolute power secured, he transformed Iraq into a cult of personality with himself at its center. Iraq in the 1970s was a nation on the rise, flush with oil wealth and ambitious development programs. Saddam envisioned Iraq as the dominant power in the Arab world, but his aspirations would soon lead the country into catastrophe. Saddam's decision to invade Iran in 1980 was catastrophic. What he thought would be a quick victory turned into an 8-year nightmare that drained Iraq's resources and manpower. The Iran-Iraq War claimed over 500,000 Iraqi lives. By 1988, both nations were exhausted. Although the conflict ended in stalemate, Saddam declared victory, but behind the propaganda lay a grim reality. Iraq was economically devastated, owing $80 billion to foreign creditors, including $14 billion in neighboring Kuwait. Iraq's economy, almost entirely dependent on oil exports, faced another crisis as global oil prices plummeted. Saddam blamed Kuwait for deliberately overproducing oil, driving prices down further. The stage was set for confrontation. By July 1990, Saddam massed troops along the Kuwait border. The world watched nervously, but many believed it was merely saber-rattling. U.S. Ambassador April Glaspie met with Saddam, expressing that America had no opinion on Arab conflicts. Some interpret this as having given Saddam tacit permission. Then, in the pre-dawn hours of August at 1990, 100,000 Iraqi troops and 700 tanks surged across the border. Kuwait's small military was quickly overwhelmed. We woke to the sound of explosions. By afternoon, Iraqi soldiers were in our streets. No one had expected them to actually invade. Within hours, Kuwait City fell. The royal family fled to Saudi Arabia. Iraqi forces looted the capital, seized key installations, and began a brutal occupation. Saddam Hussein declared Kuwait Iraq's 19th province, claiming it had historically been part of Iraq under Ottoman rule. This will not stand. This aggression against Kuwait. President George H.W. Bush, a World War II veteran and former CIA director, immediately recognized the threat. If Saddam controlled Kuwait, he would command nearly 20% of the world's oil reserves, and many feared Saudi Arabia could be next. Within days, the UN Security Council passed Resolution 660 demanding Iraq's withdrawal. When Saddam refused, the Security Council imposed comprehensive economic sanctions, but the diplomatic response alone wouldn't dislodge Iraqi forces. The Cold War had just ended. This was the first major international crisis of the post-Soviet era. The question was, would the international order we'd fought for decades to build now collapse at the first challenge? On August 7, 1990, Operation Desert Shield began. American forces deployed to Saudi Arabia at the kingdom's request. Within months, over 500,000 American troops would arrive in the region, joined by forces from 34 other nations. The coalition that formed was unprecedented. Traditional Western allies like Britain and France stood alongside Arab nations like Syria, Egypt, and Saudi Arabia. Even former adversaries like the Soviet Union supported the US-led effort. We had Syrians, Egyptians, Saudis fighting alongside Americans. But these were countries that had been in opposite camps just months earlier during the Cold War. It was extraordinary. As diplomacy continued, the military buildup accelerated. The coalition assembled the largest concentration of military power since World War II. Advanced fighter jets, main battle tanks, aircraft carriers, and cruise missiles gathered in the desert and Persian Gulf. Meanwhile, at the United Nations, the Security Council passed Resolution 678 authorizing all necessary means to remove Iraq from Kuwait if Saddam didn't withdraw by January 15. In 1991, the clock was ticking. Last-minute diplomatic efforts failed. On January 9, 1991, Secretary of State James Baker met with Iraqi Foreign Minister Tariq Aziz in Geneva, but no progress was made. As the deadline approached, Saddam remained defiant, convinced the United States lacked the resolve for for war, the deadline passed. At 2:38 am local time on January 17, 1991, the night sky over Baghdad erupted. Operation Desert Storm had begun. The air campaign was unlike anything seen before. With precision-guided munitions, coalition forces struck Iraqi command centers, air defenses, and communication networks with pinpoint accuracy. Previous air campaigns required thousands of sorties to hit a single target. Now, one plane could hit multiple targets in a single sortie with minimal collateral damage. It was a revolution in warfare. For the first time, the war unfolded live on television. CNN correspondents in Baghdad broadcast Iraqi anti-aircraft fire illuminating the night sky. The world watched in real time as a modern military campaign unfolded. In response, Saddam launched Scud missiles at Israel and Saudi Arabia, hoping to fracture the coalition by drawing Israel into the conflict. But Israeli Prime Minister Yitzhak Shamir, under intense American pressure, showed remarkable restraint. The Patriot missile system, designed to intercept incoming missiles, became a symbol of Western technological superiority, though later analysis would show its actual effectiveness was much lower than initially claimed. After 38 days of aerial bombardment, the ground assault began on February 24th. General Norman Schwarzkopf's strategy was masterful, feinting toward Kuwait City while executing a massive flanking maneuver through the Iraqi desert, cutting off retreat. We expected heavy resistance, but many Iraqi soldiers were surrendering before we even fired a shot. They were malnourished, demoralized after weeks of bombing. As Iraqi forces retreated, they set Kuwait's oil wells ablaze. Over 700 wells burned, creating an environmental catastrophe. Black smoke turned day into night, and oil rained from the sky. The retreating Iraqi army was devastated on what became known as the Highway of Death, a stretch of road from Kuwait to Basra where coalition aircraft struck a massive convoy of vehicles fleeing with looted Kuwaiti property. After just 100 hours of ground combat, President Bush declared a ceasefire on February 28th. Kuwait was liberated. Iraq had accepted all UN resolutions. The war was over. As Kuwaitis celebrated liberation, difficult questions emerged. Despite Iraq's defeat, Saddam Hussein remained in power. Coalition forces had stopped short of Baghdad. Critics argued the job was left unfinished. Our mission was to liberate Kuwait, not occupy Iraq. Overthrowing Saddam would have fractured our coalition and potentially destabilized the region. We achieved our limited objectives. In the war's aftermath, Kurds in northern Iraq and Shiites in the south rose up against Saddam, encouraged by American rhetoric. But without coalition support, these rebellions were brutally crushed. Over 100 Zalos and civilians died. For the next decade, Iraq remained under strict UN sanctions. Weapons inspectors played cat and mouse with Iraqi officials searching for weapons of mass destruction. The sanctions devastated Iraq's civilian population while Saddam's regime endured. No-fly zones established over northern and southern Iraq required constant patrolling by coalition aircraft. This low-grade conflict continued until 2003, when many of the same issues would lead to a second, far more controversial Iraq War. The Gulf War redefined warfare for a new era. It demonstrated American military dominance in the post-Cold War world and the potential for international cooperation against aggression. But it also set in motion forces that continue to shape the Middle East today. The swift victory created unrealistic expectations about American military power. The technological gap between Western and regional forces grew wider, and the war's unresolved questions about Iraq's future, regional stability, and America's role in the Middle East would haunt international relations for decades to come. The Gulf War may have lasted just 43 days, but its shadow stretches far longer. In the shifting sands of the Middle East, the echoes of Desert Storm continue to reverberate.